Word new here.
Numbing hand.
Word new here.
Essence of slug. Numbing hand.
Word new here.
Essence of slug. Numbing hand.
Word new here.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, the podcast trapped in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. This season is the serial bomb, yo, and we're looking at Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, starting off with Buffy Season 6, Episode 5, Life Serial. Today we are discussing the fourth loop, starting at 25 minutes and 22 seconds with the bell ringing, and ends at 25 minutes and 46 seconds, with the mummy hand clicking tongs at Buffy. Once again, my guest is Declan Craggs. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm great. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's like I said last episode, I love these montage bits of these time loops. It's last season I didn't have any of them, and it's with Triangle, Time Loop, and Time Crimes. Those were all great movies, but I was just, slightly disappointed that there weren't any montage, because I think that these episodes are a lot of fun, just doing like some shorter, quick episodes covering just, less than a minute a lot of times. And, this one is only like 11 seconds of a loop. I suppose I'll mention it here, but whenever I initially blocked out these episodes, I had this as two different loops, because, this is the one where she walks out the front door and then she reappears at the back door. And initially I thought that I would count that as another time loop, until I watched it this time and looking closer, and I noticed that everybody else didn't reset. This was just a part of the magic spell, so that, not only is Buffy trapped in time, this spell is apparently trapping her in space, to where she's not allowed to leave the magic box.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I, like you, initially thought that it was a separate time loop. And again, when I rewatched it to discuss it here, you realise that that's not the case at all. Even though it sort of feels like it's not.
Yeah, and like for this first walk, we do get to see Giles walking past behind her, even though we don't get his interaction with her. We see the male customer, and again, this is where the loop is. It's not 100% exactly the same each time, because this time the male customer is holding the two candles in his hands, because most of the time he's just looking at them and they're on the shelf. And the woman customer, and she's hard to see, but as Buffy walks out, you kind of see her blurry, just standing there in the front at this point already.
So, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, is it only Buffy's actions that change their actions? Or are they, I mentioned in the last episode about, they only have a certain few directions they can go in, but they're sort of stuck on a certain path. But if Buffy did the same thing every single time, would they?
That is a good question, because I think especially with Giles, because he is the one character that he almost always has just a very specific sequence of events whenever he interacts with Buffy, and he almost never changes. But everyone else does different things. Like, I believe that in the last loop, Anya came from screen right and appeared. And this time around, we actually don't see her as Buffy walks to the door, but then whenever she comes through the back door, we see Anya is on screen left, so she's on the opposite side of the magic box than she was in the previous loop. So so it's not like everything's resetting exactly the same. It almost makes me think that the characters do have like a little bit of free will, and there is what I like to call this chaos theory, to where, you can drop a coin 100 times, but it's not going to fall exactly the same way every time.
Yeah, I also think, because this is a spell that was cast by Jonathan, and I think it almost feels, whenever Jonathan does magic, it always feels like, like almost joke spells, and they're never going to be that accurate and that good.
Yeah, because I think, Jonathan is always, through this whole season, he seems to be the least dangerous and the least willing to cause physical harm to anybody, including Buffy, where Andrew is like the next step up, because Andrew is willing to summon demons that could potentially cause, great harm to Buffy, even though they usually don't. And then, of course, you have Warren at the top of the scale, that he's willing to do anything that takes in order to take her out. But especially as the season goes on, he just continues to escalate more than the other two.
Yeah, I really like the trio. I think they were a good addition to season 6, in terms of, they weren't quite your normal big bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they almost start out as like comic relief, but then they end up, almost like some of the darkest villains across all the seasons, and in a way you could almost consider them like the most successful.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, especially Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And the effect he has on, characters like Willow long term is much more than some of the other sort of villains that we've seen previously.
Yeah. And then, Buffy, going back to the loop, Buffy walks out the front door and she ends up walking through the back door, that has the no admittance sign in the back of the magic box. And she walks past this bulletin board, and it's also like a magazine holder, I think. But, on this DVD quality copy, the only thing that I could really make out on the bulletin board is we see a paper that has, in big printed letters, the word hot. I can also tell that there's some photographs posted up there, but they are all so blurry that I can't really make out. I think one looks like a figure of a woman. There's one that looks like it has maybe some crosses on there. But really the only thing that kind of stands out, and it's only on there for a split second, is, in big letters it says hot, and then it looks like there's probably some smaller font. And I love, too, that the O in the hot it's like a diamond. It's not like a circle. It's almost like it was printed on like a dot matrix printer, to where it can't really do the curves as well.
So one thing that I was wondering, if she decided on one of the loops to go out the back door, would she come in the front door?
That would be my guess, is that's what would happen. Or she would just like come right back in the other direction from the back door as well. And as she comes in the back door, the camera shows everybody else in the magic box, and we see Giles in the process of cleaning his glasses, and we see Anya there on the other side looking at her. And I love that Anya, it's very quick, but you can see that she does like a little double take where she looks from the front door to the back door, and the female customer is, holding her finger up trying to get her attention, and the male customer is in the same pose, pretty much the same pose, where he's holding both the candles, and He said, as she walks past him, he's saying missed twice. And then whenever she comes in the back door, he says missed the same way a third time.
Yeah. So there's some, you've got that continuity there, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even though she does walk through the front door, I don't believe we hear the bell ringing whenever she walks through the door. That's that audio clue that she's, restarting the loop each time.
Yeah. So I would say this is the first loop, where I think now, unlike the previous loop, she now looks like she's losing the will. She's got a certain look of despair about her, especially, when it comes to going to get the mummy, or the mummy hand.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the more comical interactions. I think all the interactions with Buffy and the mummy hand are comical, but I think this one is the most comical and least action oriented, I guess. The mummy hand is at least appears to be much less of a threat here than it does in the previous one, where it's just basically clacking the tongs at her, and she's just has her head in her hand on the corner of the fragile crate as she's just looking at the mummy hand with a bored look on her face.
Yeah, that mummy hand is definitely taunting her,
which
is what makes it so funny. With tongs as well, which is even better.
And I also noticed that this, in the previous loops, we have heard the bell ring before we get the visual cut for the next loop. But in this one, it takes it a step further, and we actually get Buffy reacting to the bell ringing, the front door bell ringing. Do you think that this is the loop resetting and it's her reacting to, oh, that's the doorbell, that means that the loop is restarting again? Or do you think that is a third customer that's entering the time loop or entering the magic box? Maybe she took longer than she normally does, and this just happens to be a third customer that would wander in at this point in time.
So I took it as the start of the next time loop. But obviously it is slightly different and, a little bit strange that she acknowledges that, which isn't been the case in the other loops. It would seem in the other loops it sort of happens, and she has no awareness of that happening until it has happened.
Right.
Whereas obviously the bell goes and she sort of looks up, doesn't she? And then it resets. So I think it's meant to appear for us that that's the time loop resetting. And the feeling that I got was that her acknowledgement of it as well. Yeah,
I agree. I think that this is a part of the magic spells where it's not 100% in sync, and this is Buffy hearing the bell and knowing that signifies, oh, I'm about to restart. So it shows she's mentally prepping herself for maybe what she's going to do the next time around differently, which we will talk about next episode, what she ends up doing differently.
I definitely think at the moment there's more. Obviously for us, we've seen, was it 3 loops?
Yeah.
So far. Whereas I think for Buffy, she's experienced, by the looks of her face, she's experienced a vast amount more than that.
Yeah, they don't really acknowledge it. They don't put a number on it. But I do think that she's probably at least a couple dozen in, would be my guess right now.
Yeah, you sort of have to, I imagine myself in a time loop, and I imagine it would take a good 4, 5, 6 goes before I start to sort of lose hope. Whereas, she in this one looks like she's at that point already, which makes you sort of think she must be further down the line than we have seen.
Yeah, and I think that this one, I haven't really talked about it yet, but I think that this episode as a time loop is an interesting outlier in a way, because most time loops, they take place over the course of a day or a couple days, where each time loop is 24 hours, if not a little bit more. Like sometimes it can be a little bit shorter, but it's usually at least several hours per time loop from my experience. And this one,
Yeah.
her time loop is only, I feel like it's typically only about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, I would say that that's about right.
Yeah, so, she is really burning through these pretty quickly. And, even if she ends up going through like 300 to 400 loops, that's only, from her perspective, only a day or two. And yeah, I'll probably talk about it more whenever we actually get to see, whenever we get to the end. But I think from the trio's perspective, I feel like this only takes like several hours.
Yeah. I like the contrast with the time loops, as opposed to the beginning of the episode where, the first sort of test they do is she's losing time.
Yeah, like time is speeding up, and then this is basically the opposite, where time is slowing down literally to a standstill.
Yeah, so I think that's a great contrast episode-wise, and it probably for her time-wise is evened up. So she's probably at status quo by the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, that's. Was there anything else that you had to say about this loop?
No, I think I've talked about everything I've got.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining me and talking with me about Buffy. Are you ready to come back for one more episode in this montage?
I am definitely ready to come back for one more.
All right. Well, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstitesmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, as well as, any discussion about time loops is welcome there. And until next time, grrr!
Arg.
Word in your ear.
Mummy hand.
Word in your ear.
Essence of slug. Mummy hand.
Word in your ear.
Essence of slug. Mummy hand.
Word in your ear.